Welcome to the Freedom of Mobility panel discussion. I'm Cecilia Edwards, a partner at the global consulting firm Wavestone, and I'll be your moderator for today. In past years, our freedom of mobility conversations have explored electrification, urban redesign, shared transit, AI-powered optimization, and social justice. Today, we're focusing on a frontier that is both exhilarating and fraught with complexity: autonomous vehicles, because they are not just the future, but they are part of our present. This panel zeroes in on cars, not because we believe that cars are the only path forward, but because they remain a critical part of the global mobility ecosystems. While a broader future may see a shift towards multimodal collective solutions, we aren't there yet. In the meantime, vehicles must evolve to support the broader mission of sustainability and inclusive access. AVs carry the potential to reduce accidents, to lower emissions, and expand mobility to underserved populations, especially the elderly and those with physical or cognitive limitations. But this promise is still met with skepticism. From ethics to infrastructure, from control to trust. The real challenge isn't just engineering autonomy, it's earning society's confidence. This includes acknowledging the fundamental challenge: how do we balance the wants of future mobility, convenience, personalization, high tech sophistication, and the pleasure of driving with the needs, equity, access, and safety for people who rely on mobility for economic participation and social connection? Today, we will explore what it will take to bridge that gap. Before we dive into our questions, I'd like to take a moment to introduce to you our panelists. Anne Laurent is a recognized innovation leader in the automotive and mobility sectors. As Senior Vice President of Tech Research at Stellantis, she leads strategic exploration into next generation technologies such as artificial intelligence, sustainable propulsion, and autonomous systems. Her career has spanned open innovation, corporate venturing, and startup collaboration, giving her a broad view of how cutting edge research translates into real world mobility solutions. Anne is known for her ability to connect advanced technology development with human centered outcomes, helping shape a future where mobility innovation serves people and not just markets. Please welcome Anne. Mario Trapp is the executive director at the Fraunhofer Institute for Cognitive Systems, and he chairs Engineering Resilient Cognitive Systems at the Technical University of Munich. He is an international authority on safety critical systems and cognitive engineering, and focuses much of his work on how autonomous and AI driven technologies earn trust through system transparency and formal safety validation. His deep academic and industry collaborations make him a critical voice in ensuring AVs are not only smart, but safe and dependable. Please welcome Mario. James Peng is the co-founder and CEO of Pony AI, a company at the forefront of autonomous driving systems in both China and the US. With prior leadership roles at Baidu and Google, James brings rare insight into the technical and commercial scaling of AVs across dramatically different regulatory and cultural landscapes. His real-world deployment experience makes him uniquely positioned to speak about what's working and what's not when it comes to public trust and operational readiness. Please welcome James. I'd like to start us off in this first section by sharing some data that serves as the foundation for our discussion, and then have the panelists respond to specific questions about enablers that they believe can advance the adoption and impact of autonomous vehicles. We'll start with a discussion on equitable access through AV design. In Europe, roughly 21% of households are facing unaffordable transportation costs. An even greater percentage of people are affected by other dimensions of what the European Commission terms transport poverty. The lack of availability of public transportation in rural areas, impacting those who cannot drive due to age, disability, or financial constraints. The inadequate transportation links in urban peripheral areas that limits residents across access to employment, education, and healthcare services, and the lack of public transport accessibility to individuals with physical limitations that reduce their independence and access to services. And this first question is for you. How should we approach autonomous vehicle design to ensure that it meets the mobility needs of underserved populations rather than defaulting on the wants of the middle class and the affluent early adopters?
Thank you for this question. So, as you just mentioned it, mobility is freedom. It's access to education, it's access to health, it's access to work. So, it's freedom. And we should ensure that every and each citizen is able to access to those services, but also to work, to education, to health. It's tremendous. It's vital. So how to ensure this to the people that are less deserved by mobility? For example, in rural areas, or disabled people, or people with low income. So autonomous driving or autonomous vehicle could be and can be the solution. But to do that, it has to be shared, it has to be spread, it has to be scaled up, and not only for few people that can afford it. When you look at autonomous driving vehicle, it's a huge technology that it's embarked in those cars, which is great. It's we can do tremendous things with autonomous driving. We can also reduce fatalities on roads and ensure more safety on the road. How can we extend that to many people? The point is really to optimize the use rate of those vehicles, and especially autonomous vehicle, with shared mobility. When you look at a car, usually it's used 5% of the time. The rest of the time it's parked. When you have a huge tech embarked in a car, such as an autonomous vehicle, we really need to spread this technology to most people, so shared mobility. So that would be the key. At the same time, we need to ensure affordability of autonomous vehicle in order to be able to scale up and to really have many people benefiting from this. And in that case, give access to rural areas, to disabled people, and to low income.
Great. Thank you, Anne. The second area I'd like to focus on is safety, both real and perceived. So Waymo data shows that 88% fewer property damage claims and 92% fewer injury claims in autonomous vehicles compared to human drivers. Yet, only 23% of Europeans say that they would feel safe using one. This response seems more emotional and wrapped in perceived risk versus any technical knowledge. So, James, this question is for you. What is it about AVs and how the AI models use data to make critical safety decisions that should make people feel as comfortable with their superior driving record as they do with those of human drivers?
Yes, I think it's very natural to what we call a double standards. I think for any new technology, especially it was controlled by AI algorithms and machines, humans have a tendency to have much higher standards on this. Actually, we have deployed our fully driverless autonomous driving on the open roads for 2.5 years. Before that, of course, with the safety driver, we have tested for more than 50 million kilometers. Our own track record have shown that the safety standards also a magnitude higher than a typical human driver. But because of the double standards that I have mentioned, certainly society has a much higher requirements on the safety. I think that's also one of the benefits of the autonomous driving. So I think one thing is seeing is believing. Our experience have shown that a lot of the new riders on our vehicles have been skeptical at the beginning, right? When they get in the vehicle, if they were the owning person in that vehicle, they tend to be scared. They tend to be a bit tense at the beginning, but even after 5 minutes, sometimes even shorter, where when the riders feel like the vehicles behaved like an experienced driver, that I think that trust have been built between the autonomous driving vehicle and the rider. So typically, our experience show that the riders after 5 minutes they start taking out their phone or start napping or do all sorts of what they typically do. So I think one thing is, of course, we need to make the vehicles to be much safer, 10 times or even more. The second is we definitely need more outreach, needs more education, and also have more practice, or basically just have more vehicles on the road for the people to try. And I think any trust takes time to build.
Yeah, that double standard seems to be prevalent or is prevalent in lots of technology. We have that same thing with cybersecurity concerns in general. We expect the technology to be safer be more secure than humans. We see that with AI. We expect AI to be smarter than humans, even if we don't feed it the right data that we need, et cetera. So very interesting points there. So now we'll turn our attention to the topic of ethics. Ethical dilemmas, the AV decision process, and public trust. So, recent European research underscores persistent public concern over the ethical decision making of autonomous vehicles. A 2024 study emphasizes that building public trust in self driving cars necessitates transparent communication about their capabilities and limitations, as well as ongoing efforts to demonstrate their safety and effectiveness through rigorous testing and validation. I'm directing this question to you, Mario. In dealing with ethical dilemmas in real world deployments, what principles or approaches are emerging as effective for managing the types of high complexity and high variability systems that we find in AVs?
Okay, so perhaps before I give you direct answer, perhaps some context. So what you have to understand is, for example, last Friday, my bonus daughter was involved in a heads-on collision in a car when suddenly a car appeared in front of her, and it was just like a wonder that all of them survived that accident. And later it turned out it was run on autopilot. Yeah, so obviously it was a problem of a lane keeper system. The driver was not doing the control function he's intended to do, and just by her reaction, she could reduce the severity. So, and in fact, there are three reasons I'm sharing this with you. And the first is, if you talk about safety, it's very important that we do not talk about numbers and spreadsheets and statistics, but we talk about the safety of the people we care about. And that's something we should remind ourselves. Something, the statistics is something completely different than having people you love in such a car. The second thing is that trust is about feelings. It's not about math or statistics. And it's about anxieties and experiences. And psychologically, it doesn't make a difference if you really experience something or if you imagine experiencing it. And one negative experience needs at least 10 positive experiences to balance that again. And this leads to the third point, and this is why I guess the decision problem is an autonomous car going to kill an elderly woman or a child. That's actually the wrong question. Because if we knew there is an old elderly woman and a child, then I would already be happy. Because the truth is that we cannot imagine artificial intelligence deliberately deciding whom to kill. In fact, we have to imagine an artificial stupidity which simply fails. So the problem today is that we simply do not see that there is a person. And this is the first thing we really have to address. And so therefore I would say three main things that we should address. So the first thing is really first address simple. We still have to solve simple problems like perception and prediction, what's going to happen. Humans are unpredictable in their behavior. The second thing we have is that, James is doing, I think, a lot about safety. We are doing a lot about safety. There are a million projects doing something about safety, but these single solutions are not relevant because there's this golden word of commonly accepted state of the art, and getting to that something that's commonly accepted in the past took decades. to get to there, and that's a time we do not have anymore. So we have to invest into safety innovation systems so that we can come to these commonly acceptance and keeping up with the innovation speed. And the third thing is we need a public discourse, but we have to acknowledge that automated vehicles will kill people just because it's physically impossible to avoid this, just like we as humans cannot avoid it. And that's something where we have to facilitate a public discourse that, yeah, what are the expectations? What is this double standard? We're still comparing safety with the saw blade safety, but we are now talking about a very complex activity, and so we have to compare it with the human safety. So it's a different benchmark. So also from the safety point of view, we have to come up with a different understanding what that means, and this requires a public discourse, but about the right problems.
So I'm going to ask a follow-up question on this. Anna and I were talking about this a little bit earlier. When we think about EVs that have partial self-driving, right? How does the complexity of individuals' use of EVs that maybe isn't the same full autonomous driving, but does the consumer really understand the difference between needing to have a human controlling your EV versus an experience with an autonomous vehicle? Maybe James, you want to start with that one?
Yeah, I think that's one of the side effect, I call it side effect of over advertising on the driver assist systems. Essentially for all the L2 or they call L2 plus, regardless how many plus you add behind it, it's the human driver that's ultimately responsible for the safety, right? I think all the manuals of those vehicles have said so. I think for L4 and above, fully autonomous is really the vehicles responsible for this. I think the solution is one is through proper regulation, the other is probably more education, because really there's a huge difference. I think the gap is bigger than probably people thought. It's not about the technology itself, what kind of advanced AI algorithm you use in both systems. It's really about who's responsible for the safety as the first line of responsibility. So I think there's certainly no single silver bullet to solve the problem or to tell the difference, but I think more education, more regulation definitely is needed.
And then, Anne, we were talking about the mix of humans and EVs and AVs on the road. Why don't you just make a comment about the complexity that adds with the different mix of drivers?
Yes, indeed, we have a multimodal mobility on the road, and not only cars. We have also pedestrians, we have also cyclists, we have many different type of users, e-scooters and so on. And we have to deal with all those multimodality, which is great for customers in terms of choice of mobility, but also which is very challenging in terms of all the use cases that we have to be able to master. What I would like to raise is the fact that concerning customers and the fact that indeed in sometimes we are in the gray zone between L2 plus L4, we have indeed to be very clear on what the car can do or what it cannot do. So I think transparency and explanation to the customer is tremendous. And we will earn trust on L4, so full driverless cars, as soon as customers understand what it can do for them. We have performed 2 years ago a significant project in Europe, which was called SAM, Safety and Acceptability of Autonomous Vehicle. There were 18 partners, different partners from various activities, so suppliers, OEMs, also institutions, universities. And through this big project, we had experimentation with many customers on many kinds of autonomous driving. We touched 40,000 users, both users of autonomous driving, so inside the car, but also pedestrians, cyclists, and so on. And we gathered many information about the acceptance or potential acceptance, or maybe also what could be something that would afraid the customers. And what was really interesting, and coming back to what James said, after a few minutes of experiments, people inside the AV cars, the autonomous vehicle cars, shuttles, trucks, buses, feel at ease. So the more you test it, when you see and that you understand the behavior of the autonomous vehicle, the more you trust it, and then you relax and you say, okay, it's safe, I understand how it works. And for the other people on the road, the cyclists and the pedestrian, what the claim that they had after the experimentation is that they expect that the AV vehicles, so autonomous vehicles or buses or whatever, will act in a predictable way and a polite way. So it was quite interesting to see the expectation. As soon as the road users understand the potential behavior of autonomous vehicles, they accept, and after a few minutes of experiment, sometimes it's 5 minutes, maybe even less, sometimes it's 30 minutes, they relax and they start to be in a more stressful approach.
So that says that we trust AVs more than the teenage drivers on the street. Their irrational behavior, I guess. James, I want to come back to you again. You frequently assert that a combination of competition and collaboration is necessary to drive innovation and accelerate the adoption of autonomous driving technology. What are the success factors that you think are required to enable that combination to work?
Yes, I think the wide adoption of autonomous driving systems is really such a complex system. It requires a whole ecosystem, right? In order to produce, just to give you some example, in order to produce a really reliable vehicles, right? We need to work with experienced OEMs, the car manufacturers, like Stellantis, for example, right? So it's not like you can just put a AV system on top of a car and it works, right? It's actually a deep collaboration, requires a lot of customization in order to turn a vehicle into fully driverless. And then there are also the operators, right? How the ones who's operating the fleet and also providing a good user experience to the riders. And then there's collaborators or players who's doing the maintenance, the cleaning, the charging, and also, of course, from a public sector, right, the local authorities, the Department of Transport, to actually authorize and monitoring the behavior of the autonomous driving. There will be also probably committees or some organizations that doing all the promotions and further monitoring of the behavior. So it requires a huge ecosystem to actually make it work. Of course, there's the component providers, sensors, manufacturing, the chips manufacturing, and all that. So I think that's on the collaboration side. Of course, on the competition side, I think some of the players, even the OEMs, the operators, they might get into each other's territory. They might want to do their own autonomous driving development. I think overall, it's a healthy competition. I think the more vehicles on the road, the more frequent when people sees the high safety of the autonomous driving vehicles, I think it's better for the adoption of the autonomous driving vehicles.
Okay, thank you for that. So now I want to switch the conversation to talk about barriers a little bit. I'm going to start with you, Mario. What frameworks or standards, if we're talking about closing the trust gap, what frameworks or standards should industry and regulators adopt to ensure that autonomous vehicles make decisions in ways that humans find acceptable, narrowing that trust gap and accelerating public confidence in AVs?
So I guess the challenge we see right now is that usually if you talk about safety, for example, safety means freedom from unacceptable risk. And what's acceptable is defined by society, and then standards should reflect that. So, but now it's something where even research doesn't have all the answers, and we are in such a fast innovation speed that the typical approach of standards is difficult to work. And just by setting a standard, people will not accept the technology. They don't care about standards. On the other hand side, they don't understand the technology. So without getting cars onto the road that they experience it, they will not learn what is acceptable for them and not. So it's a little bit of chicken egg problem. If you go to authorities, certification authorities, they do not know what they should check, what is safe enough. All of that is unclear. And so what I would say is that, as I said earlier, in the past we had decades for that. If you talk about software safety, it took about 20, 30 years until we had something like a commonly accepted basis for what we call safe and not. So what I would say is just like we invest into the tech innovation, we should invest in something like a safety acceleration platform or community. That's just a part of collaboration. It's often not really differentiating between the partners. But if all the partners share their safety concepts, have a peer review of the safety concept, have independent partners in that, you can reuse these concepts and involve the people to make that transparent. Then we create an ecosystem where we can do it in a much faster way, because we have to be aware that the AI technology we use today, even if you have a solution for that, it will be outdated in a year from now. So it's not about finding one solution, but it's really about building up a safety acceleration ecosystem that helps us to make things much faster, because otherwise society will not benefit from all the technological progress. So I would go away from the typical old-fashioned, very slow evolutionary linear standardization to something like a safety acceleration ecosystem that really has a platform character like the software innovation as such.
So, in order to address what we know as this bias that people have and higher standard that they have for the technology, what role might education play? How do we think about shifting education?
So, I guess it's in fact you have to understand that people do not actually understand how AI works. It's so fast. How should they understand how an autonomous car works? And it's these high standards. The problem is not that we expect that autonomous cars are better than us, but we expect that they are better than what we believe how good we are. And usually we believe we are 10 times better than we actually are. And I guess educating something, if we all these information types of things, so I think they don't work. So from my experience, really people have to experience it. Yeah, so people, just like you said, so they have to get into these cars, they have to experience it, they have to understand it's not a very simple system. So these things are taking over jobs from humans, and really getting cars out there, giving the people the chance to experience it so that they learn by doing. So that's something you have to experience. I guess it's nothing, we can have websites and information events, we can bring it to school. As long as they don't experience it, it will be very difficult, because trust, as I said, is a feeling. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So, Anne, when we talk about countering accessibility challenges, what do you think are the main challenges to using AVs to ensure mobility is accessible to more than just a relatively small portion of the global population that we often refer to as the happy few?
So again, it's all about affordability and how to ensure shared mobility also, to get the best of the asset being the technologies that we put into the car. What has been done in the past years is tremendous in terms of improvement. AI is really accelerating also autonomous vehicle capabilities and so on. So we still have to work on affordability to make it accessible to most of the population, and to think about shared mobility. Again, a car is used 5% of the time. So autonomous vehicle have to be used much more, and it will help to scale up and to have access to give access to most of the people. So it's really a key point. And coming back to accessibility, indeed, it's all about ecosystem and test and learn. We are not in a Kaizen approach where we improve step by step. We have to test to have the feedback from the customer. We need to listen more to the customer and their feedback and their fears potentially. So it's really by putting them in autonomous vehicle, and we need the complete ecosystem, the cities, the countries, smart regulation to make it happen also, because the more we will socialize the topic with people, the more we will get feedback from the customer, the more we will learn and we will improve the service. So it's all about being in contact with customer.
Great. And when you talk about the high utilization of vehicles, it's not just individual cars, right?
Yes, exactly. I mean, it's like robotaxi or autonomous shuttles that could be used by many people. It could be, as the same autonomous shuttle driving some kids at school and then bringing some disabled people to the hospital and then taking care of older people. So it's really in the sense that we have to maximize the usage of high technology to the benefit of the population.
And it's interesting, in previous freedom of mobility conversations, we've even talked about transporting the goods, right? We said sometimes the people are needing to get to services, but if they're trying to get to goods, maybe you could bring goods to where they are even, and autonomous vehicles could help with that.
Yeah, another example, during the day, you need the autonomous shuttle, for example, to transport kids, to transport people. And during the night, you can transport goods because you have less people to transport during the night. So it's a way to really enhance the usage of the technology.
Great. And so, James, a question for you on safety and expectations around complexity. So, given all the efforts that your company is making to leverage AI to reinforce the safety of the AV systems, what are the barriers you wish to eliminate to reduce the real and perceived risk associated with AVs?
I think the first, of course, is on the regulation, because mobility is a highly regulated industry. Although there's different customers of driving in different cities, there are different regulations as well. I think because autonomous driving will be part of the mobility ecosystem, at least a common baseline across different markets would be good. Another point I want to add is, in order to have a scale up of the autonomous driving, people tend to say, oh, because of different cities and different countries, the driving behavior and everything's so different. But the thing that in terms of making the autonomous driving to be universal, it's not really about the common driving behavior. I think common driving behavior is very easy to be incorporated into the autonomous driving, right? It's, for example, driving on the right side or on the left side, it's probably a simple mirror can solve the problem. It's really the, we call the long tail or the unpredictable or the extreme behavior. But I think the good news is that once we solve the common case or the common differences between different markets or different cities, the extreme cases, actually it's counterintuitive. The extreme cases are actually common across different cities, right? Because crazy drivers anywhere is crazy. Right? It's unpredictable. But it's predictable that those behavior will be unpredictable. So we actually can build this into the model and use really safety concept. So essentially a defensive driving behavior for us in those cases. So I think it's in a way it's actually much easier to have fully driverless to be adopted universally.
Okay, great. Thank you. So now this section, I want to talk about a call to action, because it's great to have conversations, but if we want things to change, we need to move to action. So I want to make sure that we're not having a purely philosophical one. I want to understand what we can start doing in the short term to begin materially improving the level of freedom of mobility for citizens around the globe. So we've been talking primarily this time about Europe and a lot of cities and things like that, but really this is a global challenge. And so I want to think about how we think about citizens globally. And so I'd like each of you to address the same question. And we're going to start with you, Mario. The question is, what needs to happen between now and 2030? Common year we all like to talk about. But now and 2030 for AVs to deliver on their promise of safer, more inclusive, and more sustainable mobility, and at the same time ensure that the benefits are captured not only by those who want luxury and efficiency, but by those who are most at need for increased access.
Yeah, that's indeed an interesting question, particularly if we combine it, because if we make it accessible, and it's not only luxury or convenience offering. This also somehow has an impact on the overall acceptance, because so why should we risk lives of people for luxury or convenience good only a few people can even afford to use? But it's something that really helps other people and all the people to have a better life in rural areas, disabled people, and all these things, elderly people. Then this also has an impact on on really the acceptance. So I guess this is somehow a change in strategy, because we have to be aware urban areas are much better from a business case point of view, because the infrastructure you have to provide, so the number of potential customers per square kilometer is much higher. Probably the wealth is much higher in certain city areas, and offering something like that for rural areas. And so this is indeed a change in strategy. And then suddenly it's about really making things more affordable, cheaper, and so on. So this is something where we have to change a little bit the story of what autonomous vehicles mean. I would also change the story from autonomous vehicles to autonomous mobility. So it's really, yeah, it's a service we need to get from A to B, to get medical care, to get to school, and to think about solutions for that. And once we have done that, then it's of course my personal thing that, yeah, we have to be aware of. I guess most of us have used a car in recent days, and we weren't afraid that the software in that car could have killed us in the instant of a second, because we've done a great job in safety for these cars. So people are not aware that safety is an issue. Yeah, and they are more afraid of something they don't understand. So that's new of them. And I guess here we really have to build something like that community that really brings together the public, authorities, research, industry partners, so that we get things running and that people can experience what autonomous mobility actually means and what the benefits are, and that the risks are acceptable in the end. But without doing that, it will be very difficult to get the acceptance in the society. And without acceptance, there will be no business.
Great, thank you. James, same question.
So I would like to think, in order to make the autonomous mobility to be accessible and to be affordable, the key is how do we scale up, right? How do we get to the millions of vehicles? So I would like to think about two parts, right? The safety or the technology that the top players develop is like the one between that million number, right? And then everything else, the scale is really adding zeros behind it. But it's not a simple task of adding zero. Adding zero, as I already alluded to, requires partnership, requires the ecosystem. That's why we need to work with the top OEMs, mass producing the vehicles. And then we also need to work with the public and private sectors to deploy those vehicles. So I think the key challenge for us, especially in the next 5 years, is not just think about how do we get to millions, but rather do it step-by-step approach, right? How can we deploy a sizable fleet in one city first, build a good example? I think it's, as we already discussed, right? Let people try it. They will build trust. So find proper markets to deploy them first. I think then gradually expanding that. That's actually what we have done, right? Our first step into Europe is actually in Luxembourg. I was in Luxembourg yesterday, actually experiencing our autonomous driving vehicles on the road. It's a baby step for us in Europe, but I think that's a very useful step for us. Use that as a launch pad, as a great example. I hope that in the near future, we'll be in more cities. People will have the opportunities to enjoy them. And then having European local partners like OEMs, like operators, city authorities, and then we can all work together by adding zeros behind already a proven technology. Then we can go to tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, and even more.
Great, thank you. And Anne, I'll give you the last word.
I fully agree. It's all about ecosystem. It's also about smart and harmonized regulation to help us to start somewhere, then to grow and to have people experiencing it. We need to have people experiencing autonomous vehicle to provide feedback to us, customers, road users, and for us to improve the system through also the feedback that we get from the customers. So awareness is key. Affordability also. Affordability will also comes with shared mobility. And smart regulation, harmonized regulation in order for us to be able to test, to learn, to improve, and then to scale.
Great, thank you. So today's conversation reminded us that autonomous vehicles are more than a technological leap. They're a societal choice. The path to trust, inclusion, and sustainability will be shaped not by just the systems we build, but by the priorities that we set. Do we design for those who already have access or for those who don't? Do we chase convenience or do we champion equity? This is a global issue. Mobility needs vary dramatically by geography, income, and infrastructure. If those with the most resources intentionally design inclusive solutions from the beginning, we can avoid reinforcing inequality and instead build systems that benefit everyone. During the first year of this forum, we concluded that mobility is a right. It enables access to education, economic participation, and social connections. Decarbonization, while essential, is viewed as a privilege for the wealthy. But the two must converge. The challenge now is to ensure that autonomy, access, and environmental responsibility are not competing priorities, but shared imperatives. The answers to these questions will not be settled in one discussion, but let's keep the momentum going. Visit freedomofmobility.org to join the global conversation about what freedom of mobility should mean in a decarbonized world and how each of us can help shape it. I'd like to thank our panelists and thank you for participating.